Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart. I'm here with my good friend, Peter Scalzo, 20-year cancer journey, and we're going to talk about something different today. Last week we had Brian here as a guest. I don't know if it falls out that way in the way we published it, but in actual time, Brian was here as a guest, and it was a great conversation. Just thinking about, his own journey, and I thought this Embers of Hope and his diving into depression and all that he had gone through was a great discussion. So, and I think we talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
And it raises a lot of things that him going back and looking at his and seeing his depression and the things that had hit him were such an important part of his journey. And I think what we were wanting to hope to do is do a little series on something that you and I have been engaging on, because it is, how do we engage our story? We've been working on something called story work, and I'll invite us into a little bit of conversation, because there's a couple of fields of thought, and I want to not be critical of one versus the other, but I know you and I land into this idea of Scalzo concept, and that is that to know God, you have to go back to be able to go forward, and that's not necessarily popular in all fronts, because there is another school of thought that says, hey, all you need to do is engage the present now in the best way you can, and don't let the past draw you down. I think it's probably a good way of describing that thought process. And I think there's a grain of truth there, and there's also some problems there. And I thought it might be good just to talk about those and get your thoughts on that too. Because I'm not looking to be overly critical, but just maybe explain why we are engaging in something that we're calling story work is something that fits into this fourth step inventory. And whenever you do recovery journey, you do a spiritual and moral inventory. And a spiritual and moral inventory is something that I'll let you describe, because you're an expert in this area too.
Well, expert. I mean, I just
yes, I said expert. You are an expert.
The value for a cancer patient, we've always said that a cancer diagnosis or a cancer journey is an invitation. That's sort of what we maintain. And it's an invitation to do a journey inward. And I think about the context of what that means for me personally, because at the same time that my cancer journey became metastatic, it was 1 year prior, I became part of an inner journey through recovery. I had never been in the church at that point for 42 years, didn't even understand what an inner journey was. I mean, the verses I quoted was like, all things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. Yeah. Paul says, I press onward,
right.
Letting go of those things behind me. And I thought, well, that has not, I've lived a life. I've had my formative years. Who cares?
Let it go.
It's all about the future. Yeah.
Yes.
Let it go. And I think when I did my introduction was the step 4 inventory, which in recovery was to do an honest, and it says fearless, but an honest inventory. And for the first time, I allowed somebody else to step into my inner world. And what did that look like? It looked like mapping out, charting out. There was a tool. Who hurt me? What happened? And that required me to go into my past to find out what my hurts were. But really one of the significant aspects of this analysis was, what was my part in it? And, we talked about, if it was an abusive situation, I was really a victim. Did I really have a part depending on my age? Those kinds of things. But it was in the context of going back that I was able to see my sin issues and my character defects and how they started and how I have manifested them in my life. How do they manifest in my life? For instance, codependence. I can go back into my past and see that because of my family of origin and particularly my dad and I have a great relationship today, but he was really an absentee dad. He worked a lot, and even when he was present, he wasn't really there on an emotional level. And I could ignore that if I wanted to, right? If I could try to. But instead, I in this inventory process, I went back to that, how he raised me, and we're all broken. So we all have brokenness as we raise our kids. But I saw how I developed a feeling of being unwanted. And then that feeling just manifests itself where I look to people to get to be desired. I have value and worth because somebody tells me that I do, or they pay attention to me, right? That's gone all the way through my whole lifespan. So I can go back to kind of that origin, and I can address it back then, even now. You know what I mean? And I think that what you're going to talk about today with story work is like that step 4 inventory on steroids. Like I can really go back to that time. Who were the people that were there? What were the smells? What was going on? What was I feeling? I'm going to look at that 5-year-old boy and I'm going to say, okay, what's really happened with that 5-year-old boy? How do I feel about that now? And there's huge value to me to do that with healing, which dovetails into my cancer journey, because again, this has been a journey inward and a time of reflection for me. I've had to face my mortality several times, really on an ongoing basis. And I want to live a life of purpose and meaning and significance. And so I can't stress enough the value of going back in order to go forward.
Yeah, and listening to what you're sharing there's a principle that I wanted to kick out there that fits in with that. And it's something that Adam Young had said Adam Young's a big story work person. You can see a podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves. He has a lot of material out there if you find interest in what we're sharing about today. And Peter and I are in a group of 11 or 12 guys right now who are doing something called story work. And so we're taking time to do these stories. But the principle he put out there was, you are your past. And when you first say, it's like, what do you mean I'm your past? It means that we're living out of a current narrative that is completely influenced by our past. And the past is how we interpret events in our life tells us how to interpret future events. So whether it's traumas or am I lovable? Am I loved? It's all these things affect our current right now. And so we are our past. We can't run from it. And so what we're talking about today is the reason why you need to go back to go forward. It's not to do it by yourself and navel gazing. It's to allow your life to be examined in community, and not examined for the purposes of harm, but it's to have the narration re-spoken. And so one of the things I recognized in coming into this ministry for me personally was that my narrative, my historical past would affect the way I thought about events that happened in the current. And so I would move into depression because I would feel like we're failing, and that failure I would interpret to my value. But it took community to come around and say, Sean, this actually isn't what you think it is. Here's what's really going on. And I think almost every ministry leader or pastor is going to talk about a time in their journey where, as they walked along in the journey, they became deeply discouraged because as you get in, things are hard and relationships are hard and there's problems and there's so much that these are the years that Scalzo talks about, this confusing in between. And it really is confusing because you're interpreting the current events with your past story by yourself. And it takes community and people and understanding who are able to step outside to understand what's going on, and for you to learn something new. And I love this. My buddy John gave this to me this morning, and he gave me this Proverbs 18, and it says, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. And he breaks out against all sound judgment. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only expresses his opinion. And is speaking about living in isolation. And so I wanted to just like story work in the grand scheme of things is really about developing relationship in community. And we're not going back to navel gaze. We're actually going back in some sense to look at how you've interpreted your life story for your present. Because if you've interpreted or you have, if you think about, I'm going to go a little bit weird here for a second, but statistics. If you look at statistics, well, you have to have a sample size that is relevant. And so if you don't have a big enough sample size, then you have a massive margin of error, right? So if you only statistically poll 10 people about the presidency that just happened, your odds of getting it right are pretty low because, part of the country, you name it, you're probably going to, you're either going to be wildly right or wildly wrong. If that makes sense, but you're probably not going to be in the ballpark. Well, if you think about your own by yourself, interpreting your story is everything is what we would call anecdotal. Anecdotal meaning that you only have one sample size to choose from, yours. And the greater that you can get community to help you analyze your story with a much bigger sample size and to help you understand, the events of your life. And it requires great courage to reveal, to share, and then to listen. And man, but that's what this Proverbs is talking about. A fool only wants his own opinion. He wants to be anecdotal in his approach to life. And what we're really saying is this is deeply helpful because to get a lot more feedback, to get a bigger sample size, a bigger understanding is really going to help you have a better footing in the world and understand how to interpret events. Does that make sense? Am I just being too technical here?
No, but stats was my worst college grade. So I'm experiencing just a little bit of trauma over here. But no, I mean, it makes absolute sense. And I also, in the context of that, for my own journey, I know sharing to a larger group and getting a lot of perspectives. My caution to myself is to make sure guidelines are in place, like our storywork guidelines. In other words, confidentiality and no fixing, because people are allowed to comment, but not necessarily to fix. It's really just to draw certain things out from the person. I think that's important because some people, I'll just say, are not safe. And other people
none of us are safe in a real sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
we all have critical thoughts. And if we were to spill all of our critical thoughts out into the marketplace or the community around us, we would be destroying people. And so in that sense, none of us are safe on our real inner thoughts. And so I've been wrestling with this concept of the illusion of safety. But I think there is safety in the sense of that somebody who has enough measure of maturity that they don't spill all their thoughts out and are able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and be a great listener as opposed to a fixer is what you're talking about, and learning how to do that because they're working from an assumption that their thoughts and beliefs aren't right. They aren't the set of thoughts and beliefs everyone should follow. They are also listeners and understanders that they need community to have a better alignment.
I think for me, the value of starting in recovery first, then going into story work for me has been huge because recovery has taught me that I need to deal with my side of the street only. And recovery rules are I don't share. I don't crosstalk. When someone shares, I say, thank you for sharing, and that's it.
Yeah.
And there's no fixing. So I got used to sharing with people and feeling safe under those guidelines. And then the story work now is a little bit different because people can help me explore what's going on in my setting. Like what was I feeling? And they will notice things that, and that's a big value. someone stepping into that and noticing things.
I want to highlight two things in what
Yeah.
you're bringing out, and I think this is good. Is that in recovery we use guidelines to, I'm going to say, bring about the illusion of safety, and not because it's an illusion that doesn't have some reality to it. It's the illusion of safety means that yes, there's probably critical thoughts, and there are probably immature people in the group that without guidelines would say hurtful things.
Right.
In story work, what we're doing now is that we're sharing story, and we are teaching how to do to maturely explore somebody's story where there are questions, but not fixes. And I think, and I had said one way of thinking about this is that it's fixing when what you have to share is about you. And it's not fixing when what you have to share is exploring, helping somebody to connect with their own story in a better way. And when I say that, sometimes we give something we don't think it's about us, but it is. And so the best way I can describe that is when you hear something hard said, it's you, when you personally engage somebody's cancer journey, sometimes you want to tell them, hey, everything's going to be all right. And you and I've talked about the number of times that you've heard a false statement. It's like, you're going to be healed even, or and that is, the share is actually, when you give that share, it's about you because you are having a hard time sitting in their hard place.
Right.
And when you can't sit in somebody's hard story with hard emotions and real sorrow without giving something that is trying to comfort, that's not real. That's about you. And so, and this is such a hard thing for us to learn because most of us have grown up in settings where we give false comfort, because that's our way of comforting ourselves. So I did want to think, like, there's something that has stuck out in story work that I just thought in the things that we're examining, and this is my own thoughts about this, and I don't know, how right it is. So I'm just going to put it out as the way I've been thinking about it as we've been diving into it with a group of guys, and I found it to be really, really good. But this, it was something you and I talked about earlier. Was this? Why is it today do we need so much therapy and so forth out there that didn't exist, in ancient times, or even, 500 years back? There wasn't the type of thing that we have now where we have, thousands of counselors and this whole idea of a therapy infrastructure. And I don't think it's wrong. And so I'm not actually saying this is anti-therapy. I'm actually saying, hey, something has changed. And so the simplest explanation I can come up with this is that in modern times, the way we interact in community has changed. And so when we think about story work, what you were going to share, you shared a second ago, was we're sharing something that's on the ground level. And so Adam Young will say, hey, I can learn more from one ground level story that's maybe a 5 to 20 minute stretch of somebody's life than I can learn from 30,000 foot that tells me your entire life story. I can learn more from one of those ground level stories. And I think that speaks to the power of StoryWorks, because those ground level stories is where we were shaped in our beliefs about things, about who we are, whether we're valued, whether we have security, or how do we find ourselves in a sense, or how do we deal with certain types of trauma. And so this is such an important concept. And so the point I wanted to put out there is what we're trying to steer away from is trying to be too overly clinical. We're not clinicians. We're not trying to be counselors. I think we're going back to our roots here. And the roots, as the way I see it, is the thing that might have been lost in modern times, and I call that modernity. What got lost in modernity is sitting around the fire and having conversations. Because what would happen when we sit around a fire would be somebody would tell a story, and it would be a ground level story. Is, hey, remember that time when we were in the car and we got hit and we almost got into a fight with this guy. It's like you had this ground level story, and it was about a 15 to 30 minute segment of life. And people would talk about, the spit came out of their mouth and what they smelled. And I could smell the liquor on this person's breath when they walked up to me. You would talk about all the things that your sensory experience would be described in this story around the fire. And as you did that, people around the fire would ask questions like, "Hey," or they would comment on the story, or they would add to it. It's like, "Hey, it wasn't quite like that. It was this is what I remember." And I also noticed that the way you responded there, and there would be this dialogue that would take place, and it wasn't to fix the person; it was gaining understanding in community. And this is the way for generations society interacted. But as modern times came, we have now we stay in our houses. We don't even sit on the porch anymore. We sit around and on a screen or on a TV, and we don't have those kind of conversations. And so we don't have community doing that. When community gets together, it's getting smaller and smaller. And so I think it's birthed the need for therapy, the need for modern tools for us to do that. But it's my belief that story work is a way for us to go back and do something so simple as sitting around the fire and sharing life at a ground level.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the past 3 months of doing this podcast, and we decided to pull out my journal, remember? Yeah. And you were trying to get me back to that scene, the smells, the people who were there, the people who weren't there, the whole bit, right? And a lot of it, I have a hazy recollection. It's probably from anesthesia and all that kind of stuff. But the value that I got from that journal, which was a diary, right? Of that really bad diagnosis, that really bad surgery, all the way up to the point where, that journal became my journey through the wall, right? With the confusing in between everything in it. But I was able to speak and to read this journal to you, and you helped to process and point things out that I had not seen before at all. And the value was huge for me. For instance, when I would say fact, and you would say, but is this really a truth or fact? And it turned out, no, it really, there was that sense of me, and you really, there was, I think, a string of fear. Fear was definitely one of the major emotions that I was really struggling with, fear, through that process. But just even the whole process of going through the wall, I didn't see that there was a pattern until we dissected it and talked it through. And there was huge value with me now that I see it, of just talking it through with you. And if I had done it with a whole bunch of guys, I'm not sure, maybe even more value, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. Is the bigger, it can get too big, but we'll describe a little bit of our structure, what we're doing, and but I want people to. There's a Adam Young concept that may be hard for people to believe about themselves, and he said this, and I find this to be an important part of this, and it helps with this. Are we just navel gazing, going, why do I need to go back? And it fits into this, and it's your story, Peter, your story, the one that you've been even processing with me, is better, more interesting, more exciting than any Hollywood script that's been written. And the moment we grasp that about ourselves, understanding our story is understanding something beautiful. It's understanding and interpreting and gathering something that is more exciting and interesting than any show I'm ever going to watch on TV or any movie that's been created. And I think that's a hard concept for people to grasp. And it's something to do with the way that we view ourselves, is that it's hard for us to see this. But this is a really important principle, because if you grasp that your story, your whole story, is amazingly interesting and exciting, and it fits into this really big narrative that has so much importance to it, then you're exploring something. You're not going back just to to cry over spilled milk. I was going to say it backwards. Can you believe that? You're going back to capture the script, to understand it, to grasp the importance of it, and to live in that reality of the greatness of your story, which is such a better place to live from. If you could live from the grandness of the story, as opposed to, I'm gonna just push forward and try to turn off my feelings about the past. I think that's a completely different place to live from. And the reason why we're talking about it for Cancer and Peace is that can you live in the fact that's the grandest to your story, and even your cancer diagnosis and the journey in that is part of that grand story.
Yeah.
And so we're connecting with something that's much bigger than what we even realize.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I just, I like to meet with my high school buddies.
Yeah.
And there's about 6 of them. And we meet fairly frequently. We'll meet again in the next few weeks. But usually we'll be with the wives and stuff too. But we're in a circle. And we have snacks and things like that. But what will come out is stories.
Yeah.
Of our past, high school stories, whatever. And we don't need outside entertainment. We are dying laughing. We're just really enjoying sharing life with each other from our past.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I met with some work colleagues that I'd worked with for a number of years back, and we met in Maine, and we sat around the fireplace and shared stories by the hours. And it was a wonderful experience, what we're talking about. And it helped me to process and interpret those, that my past and who I was. Why did I act the way I did at that point in time, and where I was at in my own journey, and my insecurities and so forth were part of that. But it takes a group of people who are willing to explore that to bring great meaning here. And so I think there's a level above just sitting around the fire that we can gain if that group of people that you're sitting around are a group of people that that don't desire to harm you, but desire to help you walk in who you are. And so that group of people are people that are asking questions for purposes of exploration.
Right.
And so there's an important concept here that you've put out, you started out with, in this idea of safety. Safety is not hearing a question you don't like. Or I'm sorry, not hearing a question you don't like. Safety is having people who deeply care about you, who in many cases are unafraid to ask the questions that they think are important or relevant to your life and the story that you're telling. And that's a different take on safety. And that's why I said, I think in some of the recovery groups we've involved, we've synthesized safety by not having any questions. And in the same not having any questions, you get no feeling of criticism. But story work is now to share a story at the ground level that's somewhere in that 1,000 to 1,500 words. It's maybe 6, 7, 8 minutes long when you share it out loud. And is to have 4 or 5 people in your life who are sitting there in that circle who will ask the questions. Hey, Sean, that 7-year-old version of you, what were you feeling at that time? And where was your mom at in that situation? Where was your dad? And just exploring and asking, not for criticism, but looking for things that may have been left out of the story, that there's a reason behind it, and looking for connection at a level. But then in the midst of that, it's to affirm that 5 or 6 or 7-year-old who may be needed. Because you talked a few minutes ago about something, you talked about codependency. Every one of us, and the reason why we're talking about community so much, every one of us has a need for what I would call secure attachment. That's more like a clinical term, but what that really means is to be embedded in a loving community. There's not a one of us who doesn't need that. A place of being deeply loved and deeply valued. When we don't find that, we most of the time will start searching, and sometimes we will find unhealthy ways to fulfill that really deep desire. And it starts at a young age. I mean, infants want secure attachment. And when they don't get that all the way up into their years, you said a second ago, I felt unwanted. And what you were telling me was I didn't have the level of attachment with the community of people around me that was healthy enough for me to be able to feel deeply connected in a way that I knew I was secure in who I was, my value, my place in community, all the important things about life. It wasn't there. Because when someone feels unwanted, they're not securely attached. And that means you're going to pursue attachment.
Yeah.
And you and I both have stories where I pursued attachment in similar ways. I felt deeply unwanted. And so this proverb speaks so much to me because I isolated from those who I felt the most unwanted by, and I chased after value in other areas of my life. And so we're talking about how do you, back in community now, become attached, become valued, become loved.
And I think in the context of cancer support groups, I mean, I've been really facilitating a cancer support group now in my church, through my church, because it's faith-based, for 18 years. And people join for that reason, to feel connected, to feel valued, to feel loved as their journey. Because, and lots of times, and the premise is share your issues with those who share your issues, but it's the fact that that person who's been diagnosed with cancer can't share certain things with their family. Number one, they probably do not relate to it. But secondly, they may not want to tell them some things that they're struggling with, because it's not something that would be pleasant for their family member to hear, that they would really handle it. So, but in a cancer support group, whether it's Ann's Place, which is a local one, but wherever, you can say things to other cancer patients that you can't say to anyone else or anything. So there is beauty in having community around your journey. I mean, there's some people that have been going to the cancer support group now for years upon years. Even they're fine health-wise, but they still come back.
We're coming close to time. I think where we'd like to go in the near future is to tell a few more stories.
Yeah, story work.
That we can show some story work, because this has been a really powerful tool. And the idea behind it is to just show the importance of how community at the ground level is a healing place, and a place where you can restore your identity of who you are, no matter what trauma, whether it be your cancer or stories that go way back past that in your life. And in doing so, our hope is that you find a new peace and value inside of yourself that you didn't even know was there. The greatness of your story and the value God has in you is a place that you can really live in a deep peace on the journey. So we're introducing it today, and we're going to probably talk some more on this in the coming episodes and maybe do an example or two. So thanks for joining us a bunch. And
thank you. Blessings to you.
Blessings to everyone
on your journey.